Hi everyone, I'm Chef Susie. Welcome to our live session today. Today we're going to be making a chocolate cherry tart. These are a lot of components that we've talked about and made before, so it's something that you're familiar with, and it's going to be super delicious. And this is a tart that is made with the Montmorency cherries, which are a nice tart red cherry, a little bit different than the dark Bing cherries. So you could also use those, but I prefer the red cherries. And we're also going to be putting a little bit of brandy in. And if brandy isn't your thing, you can go ahead and eliminate it, but brandy goes super nice with cherries, nice combination, and also with the chocolate too. So knowing that, let's get started. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to be making a little bit of a chocolate decoration, and this is for our garnish and for our finishing, but we're going to make this now so it has a chance to set up. Okay, so I've got some chocolate melting here, and this is just a coating chocolate. So I thought that I would make things a little bit easier today. So this is super easy to work with. This is nice for making little decorations, holds up really well. There's no tempering, and this is also great for dipping truffles or even cake pops in. So this is nice to become familiar with. It's not pure chocolate. It doesn't have the cocoa butter in it, so it doesn't need to be tempered. You just melt it. But keep in mind, it is still delicate. You're going to warm it over the double boiler, and don't get it too warm because you can harm it. You can seize it by getting it too hot. Some people do this in the microwave, and Chef Susie is not so good with the microwave, so I like to do everything on the stove top, a little bit more traditional. Okay, so we've got our coating chocolate melted, so let's go ahead and fill our pastry bag. I'm just going to be making a cone with some parchment that I had. You can do a triangle if you like, but this is kind of how I'm familiar with doing this. And what we're going to do is some piping on some parchment. Going to do a few little decorations, and then we'll do some piping on our plate too for something a little more decorative. So please let me know if you have any questions, okay? All right. Okay. Let's go ahead and we're going to set this aside. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a little piping on a parchment. And what's nice about using this coating chocolate is it can set up at room temperature, but we'll keep an eye on it. It's a little warm in here, and we might have to put it in the refrigerator. So what you can do is all kinds of things. So we can do just a simple grid. And you just kind of go back and forth. You want to make this thick enough because you're going to keep in mind that you're going to be picking it up. And sometimes they make these skinny grids too. And they're, it's something that's kind of a little random. And something like this is nice if you're new to piping. Okay, so please see the way that I'm not touching the end of the bag on the paper. I'm kind of letting it fall down. So let's go ahead and turn this around. I don't like to reach too far because I don't feel like I have a lot of control. So I like to keep things close to me and my elbows a little bit at my side, not so out, because for me it's a little bit more control. And this is why I'm rotating my pan around. So we can also do some looping. We can do a pretty decoration like this. It almost looks musical. And what you can do if you're new to this, you can draw it on the parchment, and then you can pipe over it. You can flip the parchment over. So what I recommend doing if you're interested in, kind of mastering these, and don't worry, they don't have to be perfect. No one is going to notice but you. So I just recommend, trying a whole tray someday, and you can always let them set, crumble them up, and remelt them, because this is this coating chocolate that is a little more durable. Okay, so these are super easy to make. These are just very traditional decorations. And like I said, what's nice about this coating chocolate, as long as your kitchen isn't too hot, this will typically set at room temperature. So we're just going to go ahead and let's set these aside. We might have to refrigerate them. We'll check on them in a little bit. Okay, so then let's go ahead and do a little bit of piping on our plate. We're going to be putting our tart on the plate maybe about right here. So what we'll do is we'll just do a little bit of decorative piping on the plate. Looks super nice on a white plate. What you can do is you could just drizzle the chocolate if you're not comfortable or familiar with piping. Otherwise, you can do a little bit of scrolling. So Chef Susie likes to do scrolling. And especially if you're familiar with cake decorating, you're going to find this to be pretty easy. And I'm going to leave some room on the other side for some dots. And I have a little tail there. I'll probably try to wipe it up once it sets up a little bit, maybe with my finger a little bit. And we could also do some dotting. And then maybe I'll do some dotting of the sauce on the other side, and that'll kind of carry over the dotting design. So super easy to make. It looks so pretty on a white plate. It really dresses it up. So let's go ahead and set this aside, and we will use that later when we are ready to set up our tart. And please let me know if you have any questions so far. Okay, so for the filling, we are going to be making a cherry curd, which is similar to lemon curd, orange curd, lime curds. The curds are made with typically egg yolks. You'll see them with full eggs, whole eggs too. I make a lemon curd with whole egg that I really like, made with egg yolk or whole egg, some sugar and some juice or some fruit puree. And what makes these curds so unique is they're kind of like a custard. We're going to be cooking this on the stove over the double boiler, but they're more intense in flavor. They have more juice or more zest or more fruit in them than a traditional custard would have, where you would have your milk or cream components. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some cherry puree, and then we're going to cook this on the stove. For my cherry curd, I like to add just a little bit of gelatin. You can or you can't, depending on how much you want it to thicken. And we're also going to add some butter. It's going to add some nice flavor, and it's going to help thicken this as well, because we're going to use it for the filling in our tart shell. Okay, so we're kind of a little bit all over the place. Let me know if you're following me and if you have any questions. Okay, so I made some cherry puree earlier. I just put this in the blender, and I just pulsed it. I'm not going to strain this. You can strain it if you like, and I kind of like the little bit of particle that's in here, and we're going to be making some whipped cream with this as well. So I kind of like it to look a little bit rustic and natural, but you can definitely go ahead and strain this. Okay, so we're going to add our fruit puree. And like I said, please let me know if you have any questions. Okay, I'm going to add just a little bit more puree. Okay, then we're going to set this aside because we will be using this for some cherry whipped cream that we're going to make. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and cook this on our double boiler. It's going to thicken a little bit because there are some egg yolks in here. Okay, so please let me know if you have any questions. This is something that you're going to want to keep an eye on. You're going to want to keep it close by. And you don't want that to simmer too much, so you don't want this to cook too quickly. It's going to thicken up a little bit. And like I said, I'm going to be adding a little bit of gelatin to this just to thicken it a little bit. And the butter is going to help with the thickening as well. So I can already feel it. It's starting to warm. I can feel it pulling a little bit on my whisk. And when you're doing something like this, I know that I talk about this all the time, if you feel like it's getting too warm and it's really getting away from you, then go ahead and pull it off the stove and give yourself a chance to catch up until you feel comfortable. You can put it back on and resume your cooking. So it's best that you're not letting it get too warm, that you can keep up with the whisking, and then this way there's not going to be any curdling or any overcooking. Okay, so please let me know if you have any questions. Okay, we have a question. The question is, did I mix anything in with my blended cherries? I didn't. I just used the canned cherries and I just blended them. I drained out some of the juice and I just blended them. You can mix a little bit of the brandy in here too. I'm going to use the brandy in my whipped cream, but you can definitely use a little bit of brandy in here as well. Okay, we're going to let this thicken up a little bit. It's going to kind of work on its own. Okay, so let's talk about the color of this. So this is kind of a natural cherry color. If you wanted to, you could add a little bit of red color to this. And I'm not opposed to adding a little bit of red color in my cherry curd. But you can use it just the way it is, or you can make it just a little bit more vibrant with a little bit of color. Okay, so it's getting some thickness to it and getting a little hot here. So I'm going to be careful with my water starting to simmer a little bit. I'm going to pull this off of here and I'm going to catch up a little bit because I feel it getting thicker and I don't want this to get away from me. And sometimes with these induction burners, they can really creep up on you and your water can really start to boil quickly. Okay, so like I said, please let me know if you have any questions. So this is coming together nicely. I'm just going to let this thicken a little bit more. I can feel it starting to pull on my whisk a little bit. And it smells great. Once it starts to warm up, you can really smell the cherry a lot. Okay, so it's starting to thicken. You can see it's becoming thicker. It's going to be a nice filling. It's going to become a little bit thicker once it cools too. You're just going to want to keep after this and don't let it get too warm and don't let it get away from you.
Chef, I have a question.
Yes.
What can you use as a substitute for the gelatin if you don't do gelatin?
You could use some agar if you don't use gelatin, or any substitute that you've been using so far in place of gelatin. But a lot of people use agar, and they'll use that in equal parts to the gelatin as well.
So when you use agar, do you just put it in straight, or because I've never used that? What is that exactly?
It's a powdered form, and I would always dilute something like that with a little bit of water. And if you wanted to, you could do a little bit of cornstarch as well, and that'll be a slurry that you'll mix with a little bit of water. And what you're going to do is you will put that in when you're cooking it on the stove.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so we have a nice thickness to our curd here. I'm just going to let this go a little bit more. As you saw, I had to kind of pull it off the stove a little bit to kind of catch up with it a little bit. I kind of felt like it was getting away from me. You see the thickness. You can see how it's hollowing out in the center. Okay, so this is a nice thickness. So we're going to go ahead and pull this off. And we're going to go ahead and add our gelatin. Okay, so I have some gelatin that I softened in some water. And don't worry if your gelatin is softened and it's kind of in a clump. This is just fine. and it's going to dissolve from the heat, but you don't want any of that powderiness. And this is what you would also do with the agar, I recommend. And if it's in the dry form, you want to add a little bit of water. Okay, so the curd is warm. It's warm enough where it's dissolving the gelatin. Okay, so this is nicely dissolved, and we're going to go ahead and add our butter. Okay, I'm going to add too much butter to that. Seems like I add a little bit too much there. This is going to add some nice flavor. This is going to help this set up a bit too. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put this aside. So this is this cherry curd kind of in a natural state a little bit. And like I said, you can add a little bit of red color. I'm not sure if I have any. I got a little bit of red color. I'm going to add just a touch of the red color so we can kind of see. So you're not going to want to add a drop of this. You're going to want to add a little bit at a time. I'm just putting a little bit on my spoon. We'll drop a little bit of that in there. We'll kind of bring it to life a little bit here. You can go ahead and add a little bit more. And like I said, if you're opposed to using colors, that's okay. I always like to use just a little bit when things are looking a little dull. You can add a little bit more, but I'm just kind of adding just a little bit. I've got a little bit more on my spoon here. Like I said, color, you're going to want to be careful when you're adding that. You can always add a little bit more, but you really can't take it out. You have a big problem if you add too much. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and set our cherry curd aside, and we're going to be working on our shell now. Okay. So that's going to kind of cool at room temperature. I've got some ice that we can put it on if we feel like it's not getting quite cool enough. Okay. So now let's talk about the tart shell. So we're going to be making a chocolate tart shell. Let me kind of get some of the stuff that we're not using out of the way. Okay. So I've got some tart dough that I made earlier. This is just a basic tart dough. I just used some butter and some sugar, and I used some all-purpose flour and some egg. And what I did to make my chocolate tart dough, you can take your favorite tart dough recipe and you can substitute some of the flour with a little bit of cocoa powder. I used a Dutch processed cocoa powder, and it made it a rich dark chocolate color. I like to make mine pretty dark, but you can make it lighter if you like. And you're going to chill this, and then you're going to roll it out. Okay, any questions on the tart dough?
Yes, Chef, I have a question, please.
Okay.
What is the difference between the Dutch processed cocoa powder and regular cocoa powder?
Okay, so the Dutch processed cocoa powder is it's alkali. It's treated with an alkali, and it's typically you'll see it very rich and dark in color. If you get some natural cocoa powder and you put them side by side, the natural cocoa powder is much lighter. The Dutch process is much darker. It's perfect for things like tart dough to make it a little bit richer. Cookies, and it's also great. It's my favorite for rolling truffles in. And the biggest difference is when you're using this with a leavener. So if you're using let's say you're making the red velvet cupcake, for example. So you're going to want to use, if you see a recipe that specifies natural cocoa powder, be sure that you're using that because there's acidity in there, and that is what is going to activate your baking soda. So you don't want to interchange these if a recipe specifically calls for the natural cocoa powder, because that means it's acidic and it's not treated and it's not alkaline. It's not missing that acidity, which is going to make it a little bit darker. So I hope that kind of clears things up a little bit. And I I have a link that I'm going to attach to the formula for this, and that explains the two cocoa powders, and it shows them side by side, and I think that'll be helpful. But that's a really good question. It's something that you want to become familiar with, and you want to be careful not to interchange these. But for me, my first choice is always the Dutch process because it's just a really beautiful, dark, rich color. And like I said, I like to use it in my tart doughs, makes it a nice dark color, and also for rolling truffles and things like that in, or just even dusting on something like your chocolate meringue assignment. Super nice.
Now, another thing I wanted to know, because I noticed at the store chef, usually I notice when I go to get the cocoa powder, it just either says cocoa powder or dark, but I've never, is it going to specifically state Dutch? Is there a difference between it stating Dutch and just, if it just is Hershey's dark?
It It will specify, and if you look on the Hershey's, you'll see it should say natural underneath the name. So just just look at your label, and your label is going to tell you too. If you're unsure, kind of look at the ingredients and the processing. It should give you some information on that. And if you find that you're a little confused, you just give me a call or send me a message and let me know what you're looking at, and I can help you. But there are just, there's a lot of different brands of cocoa powder out there. And like I said, when I can, I use the Dutch process. And that's just my personal preference. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to roll out this dough. I had a little piece here. It got a little kind of warm when we were talking. So you might have to brush off some of this flour a little bit. And what we are going to do is, I've got some tart shells. So we're going to be filling one of the tart shell pans. Hey, I got a lot of stuff here today. So I got to kind of move things around a little bit. Okay, all right. So I've got these tart shell pans, and you can pretty much use any kind of pan, but I like to use the ones where the bottom comes out because you know it's always going to come out. They have some nice nonstick ones, and if you're using a pan that the bottom is not coming out, be sure that you're greasing it with some butter or some pan spray. And I always grease these as well with a little bit of pan spray. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to roll this out. We're going to show you one so you get a little bit of an idea. And then I'll show you one that I baked off. Okay, so my dough got a little bit warm. There's a little bit of cracking. This has been known to happen. But we're just making a little one, so I think we can kind of make do. And when I'm making these individual tarts, I'm careful not to roll this too thick because someone's going to be eating this with a fork and a knife. And you don't want them to, put their fork in it and have it go flying. So just be careful you're not making these too thick. Okay, so let's go ahead and fill our tart shell. We got a question. Okay, the question is do you make tart dough the same as puff dough? Completely different. Puff pastry dough is a laminated dough, and this dough was made with the creaming method. So I'm happy that you mentioned that because I didn't describe the method that I used for the dough. So the creaming method to make this dough, what I did is I creamed my butter and my sugar, and then I added my eggs and I let them emulsify in, and it's important that they're at room temperature because they're going to blend in a lot better. And then I added my flour. Whereas your puff pastry dough, you're going to be making a basic dough probably with some flour, a little bit of water, and you're going to be folding butter in to make it laminated. Those are going to be the layers of flakiness. So this is kind of a little bit different, more delicate, kind of more cookie-like. So I hope that's helpful. Okay, so let's go ahead. We're going to go ahead and fill our pan. And like I said, try not to let this dough get too warm on you. It's very warm in here. We've kind of been talking, so it's got a little bit of cracking. And these edges are sharp, so what you're going to want to do is kind of lift it up and kind of push it into the corner a little bit. Okay. And just going to trim off the edges. You can press them off or whatever kind of works best for you. Okay. So this is our tart shell. You can make these in individuals. You can make them in little petites. And you can make them in big tarts too. So I'm just going to press in some of these cracks a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to just dock the bottom a little bit, and you can do this with a fork, just so you don't have any air coming out and making a bubble. Okay, so we're going to weight this down. I've got some parchment. You can also use aluminum foil. You can even use a food professional grade plastic wrap works well, but make sure it's professional grade, because some of those plastic wraps that are colored for home use, they just melt. So I recommend just using the parchment or the aluminum foil. So you're going to weight this down. And this is going to help the sides hold up, and it's going to stop the bottom from bubbling up. So I like to use rice. A lot of people use beans, and to tell the truth, I use rice because I don't like the way that beans smell in the oven. So I use rice. And what you can do is you're going to bake this about halfway for about 10 minutes. The shells that are darker, you're going to have to keep an eye on the timer and watch for some dryness, because you're not going to see the browning that you would see in a vanilla shortbread crust. So what you're going to do is bake it about halfway, pull these weights off, bake it a little bit more, and you're going to let it dry out a little bit, and you'll see the wetness when you pull this off. And save your rice. I have a container of brown rice in my cabinet that I use just for weights. And like I said, you can use beans too, but I prefer to use rice. Okay, so this gets baked, and that's it. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at the crust that I baked earlier. Okay, any questions on anything so far? I know there's a lot of components to this one, right? And my hollow is much dirtier than it usually is. Okay, so let's put this aside. All right, what we're going to do is we are going to check on our filling really quick, see if we need to ice it down, see how it's setting up for us. Seems like it's setting up. It's got a little bit of gelatin in it, which is really helping it out a lot. So it's cooling off nicely. So we're going to go ahead and grab our ice bath. And we're just going to cool that down a little bit. Got my whipped cream on here. Okay. We are going to let that cool off a little bit. And we're going to go ahead and grab the tart shell that I made earlier. So this is a perfectly baked tart shell. Like I said, keep an eye on your timing when you're making these dark shells, because you're not going to see that golden brown color that's going to help you out. So it's easily coming out of the pan. And there it is. And there's a little bit of pecking in the bottom. That's okay. We're going to be covering that up with our filling. Okay, so like I said, if you don't have the bottom release pans, make sure that you are buttering that or spraying it really well. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and make our whipped cream while we're letting our filling cool off, and then we are going to go ahead and finish off this tart. Okay. All right, so I've got just some whipped cream that I made earlier, and I'm going to be adding some brandy to this and a little bit of the cherry puree. So you can add as much as you like. I'm not going to add too much, because I don't want to have my whipped cream get too loose on me. Okay, so for the brandy, I'm not using straight brandy. I am using Christian Brothers brandy, which is delicious. It's great for baking. It's reasonably priced. It's kind of a middle of your road brandy, but it tastes great. So this is my go-to brandy. But you can use any brandy that you like. You could even use liqueurs, amaretto, frangelico, anything like that. But the brandy does go very well with the cherries. So what I did with my brandy, it's not straight from the bottle. I warmed it up a little bit on the stove, and I let some of that alcohol come out of it, and you could kind of see it evaporate a little bit. But be careful if you're doing this on gas that you're keeping it very low. Keep back a little bit, and because it could flame up on you. So you just want to warm it up and kind of evaporate some of that alcohol, and then it won't separate the cream when you add it. You're going to have some nice flavor without all that alcohol in there. But like I said, be mindful. Just warm it a little bit, swish it around a little bit. Don't let it catch on the flame because it could flame up on you. Whenever I'm doing that, I kind of always stand back a little bit. I'm never looking like this with something like that. I just kind of always stand back a little bit, and be careful with your loved ones or little kids around too. So let's go ahead and add a little bit of this brandy. We're going to give this whipped cream some nice flavor, and then we are going to go ahead and set up our tart. Okay, we have another question. Yeah, the question is can you use pie weights instead of the rice? Same purpose if you have those, but I don't recommend going out and buying those unless you really want to, because you can always use some rice or beans that you have in your cabinet. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit more of the cherry puree to the whipped cream. I'm going to make it a little more cherry flavor. Okay. And please let me know if you have any questions. We're going to go ahead and finish up our cherry brandy tart. Okay, so we have some nice cherry brandy whipped cream. This is going to be a nice complement to the dessert. So be careful that you're folding this in. And we're going to go ahead and fill our pastry bag. I got a little star tip in here. And like I said, please be sure to let me know if you have any questions. Do we have questions? No? Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and get this kind of filled up and plated. Okay, so our cherry curd is setting up nicely. It's got a nice thickness to it. And it's just
Chef?
about cool. Yeah.
I have one more question. I was just trying to get to you before you went on. With the whipped cream, do you have to compensate for the fact that you're adding brandy and the cherry puree to curd to it by over whipping it, or a little bit stiffer, or is it just okay at medium peaks, or how does it go?
No, I just whipped it at a, it's kind of a firm peak, but it's not to the point where it's getting over whipped. So a little bit more than medium. I'm not putting a stabilizer in it because I'm not adding too much. But if you find, if you're in a warmer climate, you can use a little bit of a stabilizer. They sell some things in the grocery store and they're called Whip It. And those are for stabilizing your whipped cream. So you can add a little bit of that as well. But I just used my whipped cream and I didn't add too much. You have to be careful. There's the fine line. If you're adding too much, it could get a little runny on you. And what you can do, if you find that you've added your cherry and your brandy and you're like, this really looks a little bit too soft, I'm not going to be able to pipe it. What you can do is try whisking it back a little bit because maybe you didn't whip it enough in the first place. If you see separation, that means that there was probably too much liquid added. But I recommend those Whip It products that you see in the grocery store. I've used them before and they're great. They come in handy. It's like an instant stabilizer and it's not flavored as far as I know. It comes in a blue packet, so it's pretty handy to have for stabilizing whipped cream. Okay, so let's talk about filling our tart. What you can do, if you're going to serve this right away, you can just go ahead and add the filling. But let's say you're going to put this in your bakery case and it may sit, if you don't sell all of them, you may have some more tomorrow, so you want to be able to use them. You can paint the shell with chocolate and it's going to protect the shell and it's going to keep it nice and crispy. But for me, this is a plated dessert that I'm going to be serving right away, so I'm just going to go ahead and put it in the shell. If it starts to soften it a little bit, it's just going to be a little bit easier to eat. But you can paint it with dark chocolate. Some people paint these with white chocolate. I think this one in particular looks better with dark chocolate. And my vanilla shells, I usually paint them with a white chocolate. And that's going to help protect it so it doesn't get moist or soggy overnight if you have to leave it set. Okay, so our cherry curd is looking great. It's nicely set up and it's just about chilled. So we're going to go ahead and do our plate up. I've got some water on here. So I'm going to go ahead and take that off. And like I said, please let me know if you have any questions. Okay, so you can see this set up nicely. You can add a little bit more gelatin if you want this to set up just a little bit more. And I don't like to make my fillings all that thick. So we're going to be garnishing this with our chocolate decorations from the refrigerator in just a minute. We went ahead and put them in the refrigerator because they weren't setting up all that well. Okay, so we've got our cherry curd. Looks great. Like I said, you can make this a little bit thicker. You want to be careful not to thicken it too much. You don't want it to get rubbery at all on you, but I like to serve mine a little bit looser. So we've got our plate that I made earlier. And as you can see, this chocolate coating, it's set up nicely at room temperature. I was a little worried about our decorations, so we popped them in the refrigerator because we're going to be picking this up and putting it on the dessert. Okay, so let's go ahead and do our plate up. And like I said, I've got a little bit of a tail here, so I'm just kind of cleaning it up a little bit. You can clean it up with your knife too. And oftentimes things like this, they really go unnoticed. So sometimes we notice them more than anyone else would. But that was kind of a big tail, and I kind of wanted to get that one cleaned up a little bit. Okay. All right, so we're getting ready to wrap up. We're going to go ahead and plate up our cherry curd tart, and then we're going to say our goodbyes. Okay, so I've got a little bit of chocolate sauce that I made with some chocolate and brandy. So we're going to go ahead and put that on our plate for our sauce component. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to just do some dotting with this sauce. And you can pretty much do anything. You can do swirling. Cherry sauce is nice with this as well. And we are going to go ahead and finish this off with our brandy whipped cream. Our cherry brandy whipped cream. So it looks super beautiful on here. And I've got a few berries, and I've got some kiwi berries too. I don't know if you guys have ever seen these, but these are pretty cute. They feel a little soft. I'm not sure. Let's go ahead and check them out. So these are pretty cute looking, and we can go ahead and put a few of these on our plate for a little bit of green color. You can also do some pistachio nuts too. And please let me know if you have any questions because we're getting ready to say our goodbyes. We're going to get these decorated. And I'm happy that you guys came today. And we'll go ahead and put a couple of these little kiwi berries on our dessert. And you don't have to peel. These are pretty similar to grapes. And let's go ahead and put a little bit of raspberry as well. Okay, so thanks so much for joining me. We're going to go ahead and put our chocolate decoration. And like I said, we popped these in the freezer. It was a little warm in here, and they need to be peeled off. So I don't know, which one do you guys want me to use? I think I'm going to go with the long grid. I think that'll look pretty. It's going to add some height to the dessert. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and push it in. And then we're just going to stand it up. And it's got some nice height on our dessert. So this is our chocolate cherry brandy tart. And thanks for joining me today. And we'll see you next time. Goodbye.